goshawk takes off in like a searching flight, and he sees the running quail before we do. He's the reason we know they're running, and he got really good at this. And he would pitch up, and he would go maybe 30, 50 feet and kind of like flare his wings like a kestrel and kind of hover there. And those quail stop running, they pin. And so I'm screaming free, which is my release word for trigger, and he runs in and he flushes the covey. So a covey just erupts under a hovering goshawk. And I got Mike McDermott right next to me, and Hash Brown folds his wings and just smacks one right out of the air, like right over a verbal release after a pointed find. And the person who had got me into quail hawking, the person who had taught me quail hawking and got me into Wieslas is right there with me for the first time.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast. And I have to start off like I always do and give a quick shout out to the people who support our production, being Baba Yaga Crafts out of Poland. If you all are ever in the market for any new equipment for your hunting partner, be it anklets or any kind of hyper jesses or anything like that, definitely hit him up. His contact information is on our website at falconrytold.com, and you can also hit him up at Baba Yaga Goshawk on Instagram. He makes some great stuff, and I know you've heard me preach about it many, many times, but it's well worth the time and the money to check it out if you haven't yet. And also, if you're in the market for a potential new hunting partner for next season, think about hitting up Seth Roy from North Mountain Goshawks, and especially if you might be in the market for a parent-reared goshawk or, maybe even an imprint, it's definitely worth checking him out. He produces some great game hawks, and I've seen some of them fly in person, and they do great. So I'm pretty sure if you hit him up and get your name on the list for next upcoming breeding season, you won't be disappointed. He produces some great birds, and if you hit him up, just tell him we sent you, and I'm pretty sure you'll have a good time next season. So head to northmountaingoshawks.com, fill out that information form, or just hit him up on Facebook. Okay, well, I hope that you all have enjoyed the starts to our 2 new series featuring dachshunds and falconry, and then some falconry in Canada as well. Those series will both be kind of ongoing for a little while with some other individual episodes mixed in here and there, but our dachshund series is going to continue with another guest who, yes, has been requested quite often here on the podcast. And once again, it's not that we haven't heard the requests and whatnot, but this was another guest who has also been a friend of mine for several years now. And we keep in touch every so often and see how each other are doing every so often. But with as much as he and I have been traveling over the years, this was another episode that I absolutely refused to do remotely or really in any other kind of circumstance other than face-to-face and in person, because I knew that we would have a lot of catching up to do. And yeah, I mean, that's exactly pretty much how it ended up. We recorded for almost 2 hours and caught up quite extensively and talked about a whole bunch of different stuff, including quail hawking and dachshunds and, all kinds of different breeds and different aspects about dogs and things. And like I said, there's so much stuff that we covered in this episode, but rather than talk too much about it, once again, just figured I'd go ahead and jump right in here to this conversation that I had with Tyler Sladen that occurred while we were both at terrier trials over the weekend of my birthday in Kentucky. So anyway, I hope you all enjoy it. I know it's probably been a long-awaited thing for some of you listening, but hey, patience is a virtue, and good things come to those who wait patiently. So anyway, hope you all enjoy, and here we go. Here's Tyler Sladen. Yeah, I mean, I expected, as I was telling you earlier, just to be completely annihilated and barely have the energy to do this. But I'm happy that's not the case.
You didn't miss much. He showed up at a reasonable time this morning. I mean, we got started this morning at like 7 sharp. So for this trial, that's just not the case. It's usually like Mr. Mills rolls in at 9 with a donut and coffee, and tells a story till 9:30, and then they're like, "Oh no, it's hot."
Yeah, I don't know. Like, this has been a cool experience. I'm glad that I called you the other day when I did, and this all worked out. And of course, it's another one of the situations where I've had to literally demolish myself to like make it happen.
Yeah, but there was still the degree of you made it happen. But you're like, when do you come out this way? And I was like, well, actually,
Never.
never. But I will be there next weekend.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, so
Yeah. No. So I mean, it's people ask me a lot. As I'm sure you can imagine. I mean, I've been asked a lot if we're ever going to like have you on and stuff. And what I always tell people is I've known the dude for like 8 years or whatever. And he and I are both mobile enough that there's no way I'm going to do this remotely with him. Like, I'm going to wait until that time that we actually, are in person together.
Yeah, that's beyond fair.
It's taken a long time, but I'm glad it's finally worked out at least. And like I said, I'm just glad I got more than 2 hours of sleep last night. That's all I know.
Yeah, I think I was close. I think I got like 3.5, but I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting to. I didn't know if my buddies were going to go out of their way to do anything extra or force anything down me last night.
Oh yeah,
but. I know you don't really partake in a lot of that stuff anymore for the most part. But,
no, I've drank once in 7 years, and it was at a funeral, so like that's a very extenuating circumstance. But yeah, last night, like I've driven all the way across the country. I don't get to coon hunt like I used to, and they were like, "We're going coon hunting. You coming?" I was like, "Yeah." We were coon hunting last night till 3 in the rain. So, and I didn't mind. They were like, "I'm sorry, it's awful." And I'm like, "You don't understand. Like, I love this. I drove here for this."
Yeah.
So it was still fun.
No, that's cool. Yeah. So, I mean, you ended the hunt about maybe 30 minutes or so ish after I finally got to bed last night. I was falling asleep in the Uber on the 10-minute drive back from the from the bar to my Warwick rep's apartment or whatever, and I just crashed on her couch for like 4 hours last night, and then drove back the 3-hour drive or whatever it is from Nashville up here this morning. And so, like I said, I'm just between the heat yesterday and everything else that went on, and the fact that I only had 2 hours of sleep the night before that. And you know how it goes, man. You're a road warrior too.
Yeah. Last night, normally I'm pretty good about my at least my bedtime routine. But last night I crawled up in my tent, didn't even get in my sleeping bag, and fell asleep with my shoes on. I was done.
Yeah, sounds about right. And, I've worked, as you know, I've also worked night shift for the better part of the last decade too. And there is no such thing in my world as a sleep schedule or a circadian rhythm. It doesn't exist for me anyway. So at least it's a little bit easier just for me to stay permanently wrecked.
Yeah.
But
it's consistent.
Yeah.
It's consistently chaos.
Yeah. I mean, consistently inconsistent. It's, it's a great way to live.
It's not bad. My rhythm's definitely a lot better in the winter. I mean, you're forced. It's dark at 5. That means you get everything done by 5 and you go to bed. But the summer and it's dark at 10, you're like, whew. I can't physically lay down when it's light out. I just don't do it. So
yeah. Well, it's been a while since it really has been probably 7 or 8 years or something since we've actually seen each other in person. It's been probably at least 2016, 2017, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know when the last time would have been or even where.
Yeah, I don't think that I had seen you after you moved. I don't think I've seen you since you moved.
Yeah, so I left Missouri 2017.
Yeah.
So had to have been sometime in there.
Yeah.
I remember stopping by your house one time. I don't remember what it was for.
It was
but
to pick up the Harris.
Yeah, it was it was Azula.
Yeah,
so yeah, it was like January 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah. No, that had to have been that would have been December of 2016.
Yeah, no, that was it. Yeah. So because we were already squirrel hawking over terriers and dachshunds by January.
Yeah, and you had just lost Greedo.
Yeah, because Greedo died in December.
Yep. Got electrocuted or something, if I remember right.
Yeah, a covey of quail put in. McDermott's dog went on point. He flew up to a pole for a reflush, and like he noticed the dog. He turned to look at the dog on point, and head touched the top wire. It was like a slight rain, and wet hawk grounded. So yeah, that was the end for that bird, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And Mike said some profound advice then, because I was a lot more wet behind the ears in falconry. Then Mike said, well, if you never let them go, every bird you fly in falconry will die at some point. And I was like, that's heavy and like rough, but it's true. The only happy ending is letting a bird go.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, and even still, that bird's still going to die.
Yeah, but you don't have to bear witness to
exactly.
it. So,
but you know it's inevitably going to happen.
Inevitably, but like the last thing you know of that bird is I cut it loose.
Yeah.
We had a great time. I cut it loose.
It's out of my hands.
Yeah. Whereas like if it goes to your buddy to a breeding project and dies in a breeding project, you still know the ending. So
sure. Yeah.
It truly is like the only happy ending. Like even recently, Miss Francie's Harris hog died at like 33 years old. The bird's older than me, and even still, that's hard. That's a hard. I mean, you got 33 years to look back on, but still, that's not a happy ending.
No. Well, and it's like when I was talking to like Ronnie Moore in the UK. I mean, he had that same golden eagle for like 28 years. And like I asked him, I was like, how did you know? I mean, I hadn't known of anyone really that had flown a bird for that long, and actually been flying it, that had been able to keep one alive of any species for that long.
Yeah, I mean, I think the harder question there is how do you pick up the pieces after?
Yeah.
Like that's a hard horse to get back on top of. Like look at Michael Clark and Betty. Like I remember watching him trap that bird online in like 08 or 09, and he's still flying her. Like that's going to be a hard ending one day.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I mean, they say over and over again, I mean, just, to kind of condition yourself to not get attached at all to like your birds and things like that. But, when something is in or part of your life for that long, it's really almost kind of impossible, at least not just a little bit.
Yeah. And it's one of those things you can say till you're blue in the face, but doing it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to at least talk about it on a falconry podcast for one. I've only ever done like gun dog podcasts. So like it's always surface level falconry questions, but these are like the deeper falconry questions that no one's going to ever ask on a gun dog podcast. They're not going to ask this on a Quail Forever podcast. So
sure. No, and that's why I just like setting my stuff up, like, having conversations, because this is the kind of stuff that falconers sit and have a beer and talk about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, these are the things that, I mean, there's all kinds of like books, and there's all kinds of, manuals and to do, information out there on how to go about, working with birds and things like that. But these conversations to me are, and finding out kind of what has made people the way they are and stuff, especially in the context of the sport, is really what I enjoy,
No, same here. And they're definitely heavier. Like to me, online falconry and books, that's low impact on my personal falconry. Like online falconry, honestly, probably has more of an influence on most people's falconry than a lot of books. Like books can be inspirational, but deep conversations with other falconers at 3 a.m. in a hotel lobby at an AFA meet, heavier, or like a conversation with your mentor, like walking a field, heavier, and seeing, you can read about trading a bird off 100 times, but seeing 5 people do it differently, you're going to pick out from that one person. You're like, no, that's how I want to do it. Like that looked right. That was fluid.
Right. And you'll see 3 or 4 other ways that you definitely don't want to do it.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, I was sidestepping that. You're going to see like, well, 1 or 2, you're like, that ain't it. That is not the way. And then you'll see 1 and you're like, man, that dude's a smooth operator.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, what's funny about that too, though, is then you'll see the same dude do it the way you didn't want to do it at some point too. Sometimes just because we all have those moments that even as refined as we
and you'll see it with falconry. You'll see it with dog handling. The best dog handler in the world that trains people on not to be emotional in your training. it's inevitable. You'll see him get emotional. One of the most well-respected terrier guys this weekend, I watched him train a little emotionally this weekend, and I've never seen that out of him. I've known him like 7+ years, so it happens.
Yeah. Well, and
we're human.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with dogs, I mean, they become such a big part of your life, even more so than these birds, and just,
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, like you have a spouse, for example, like mine and stuff, who couldn't give two shits less about, the birds. But like if something were to happen to one of these wieners out in the field and I came home, it would be really hard for me to be able to come home. You know how it goes, man.
And then like I always like to ask people, like especially like passionate falconers, the people that make falconry who they are, which is it's a small percent, but those percent really stick out. But like ask them, like if you had to get rid of birds or dogs, what are you getting rid of? And 9 out of 10 times they're gonna say they're gonna get rid of the birds first.
Yep.
I love my birds. I love every bird I've ever flown, but I love my dogs a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and my dogs were there for the bad birds, and my dogs were there for the good birds.
Yep. Yeah, and it's so funny you bring that up because I mean I've mentioned it briefly before on here and stuff, but like I've had that same conversation with at least probably, I don't know, a handful of mutual people that we both know. I mean, I had the same conversation with Domsky. I've had the same conversation with like Redig. I've had, I've had like, the same conversation with a lot of other friends. And, and it's funny because and some of them, you might ask at first, there's hesitation, but I think you're absolutely right. They're still going to end up.
Well, yeah, you got to hesitate. Yeah. You're like, I mean, it's like asking a soccer player to give up soccer or a bass fisherman to give up fishing. But even on like a more deep-rooted scale, there's a lot of people I've met in the dog world, like Jerry Coulter, the owner of Northwoods Bird Dogs. He was a falconer, but now he's an incredible and well-respected. He said, I had too many irons in the fire, and he went full force on dogs, and he's left his mark on the breeds he works with. But like some people do give up the birds for dogs. It does happen.
Yeah. And I think that unfortunately almost every falconer to some degree or another always has that crossroads where they kind of have to make a choice.
Yeah.
And at least if not giving up both, like something's got to give somewhere, and if someone isn't dedicating everything to one thing, but they're doing multiple things, then inevitably one or the other has to suffer a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you'll even see that when people are full force in falconry and they're flying 3 birds. One bird is better than the other 2.
For sure.
And I learned that about myself a while ago, that I'm a one bird band. I fly one bird really well, and I fly 2 birds half-ass, and that's just not me.
Yeah.
However, I've got a kennel full of dogs now, and I wouldn't. You couldn't make me get rid of 5, and I've got over 12. So
you went all the way into the deep end, with the dogs, and I mean, even whenever we first started to kind of get to know each other, I mean, and if I remember correctly, I mean, we both got into falconry really close to the same time. I mean, you knew about it way before I did, and I think it's something that you knew that you wanted to do way before I did. But like, as far as the actually starting into it, I mean, we've both been in it like relatively the same amount of years, give or take a year or 2, maybe.
Yeah, and it's falconry, like a lot of things, especially to anybody with ADHD. When you get into it, everything's shiny. You want to put your hands on everything. It's all shiny. I want to fly an Apamato. I want to fly a prairie falcon. I want to fly a peregrine. And like you fly a bunch of stuff, and then it's hard to figure out like what's the stuff that's for you. And once I figured out that like goshawks on upland birds is my thing, I dove in head first into a 3-foot pool.
Well, I mean, you remember some of the conversations that we used to have about that very thing. I mean, we both kind of did that same thing. We tried a bunch of different crap within our first like year or 2 of getting our general and things. And like, I mean, I remember telling you how much I like long wings and this, that, and the other, tried dabbling in that. I know you tried, kind of doing the same thing too. You kind of went through that enamorment with one species, but then inevitably landed on a different one. And I mean, if you had a little bit of a retrospective or introspective, I guess I should say, question here, but I know I have this conversation with myself often, but how do you feel about your early years? I mean, if you had things to do over again in that way, like, would you have gone back and been able to tell yourself, like, dude, you should just settle on this and focus on this, and instead of like doing all that stuff? Or do you wish you could have done anything over?
See, that's hard because, like, first of all, 20-year-old me would never listen to 31-year-old me.
Yeah.
And that was a part of being a 20-year-old me.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that had I focused, I wouldn't have been the falconer I am today. I wouldn't have been the dog handler I am today. And I wouldn't have scratched those itches that would have left me curious. They would have left me awake at night wondering, well, what if I had done this? Or what if I had done that? Looking back on my early days in falconry, I know what would have worked well and I would have done damn good at it. Mm. But I know that because of what I went through.
Yeah.
And I know that going forward. So that's really hard. But I can comfortably say I'm glad I took the path I did. There's a few things probably I would have deleted, but overall I'm pretty glad with the path I took. I learned with a lot of hand-me-down birds. I learned with a lot of hand-me-down dogs, and I learned real quick that a fresh started dog and a fresh started bird are a hell of a lot easier, especially when it's like the round peg for the round hole. A lot of falconers and a lot of dog people too are new to dog people. They love that like hexagonal peg through a triangle, and they'll beat it with a hammer for years. And
love the challenge.
I like the challenge. And don't get me wrong, there's people that truly love the challenge and excel at the challenge, mm-hmm. but that is not the general consensus.
No.
I mean, when you look at Lauren flying problem rehab birds and doing incredibly well with them, that's someone that enjoys the challenge, but that's someone that like thrives in that challenge. So that ain't me. I don't like, I love a challenge, but I love a different kind of challenge, I guess.
Yeah. I'm the same way. And I have to probably tend to agree with you and say that I kind of came to the general consensus as well. There's not really much that I feel like I could go back and change because, I learned a lot of really good and also hard lessons, especially in the first, that big middle chunk. Not like we've both had illustriously long falconry careers thus far by any stretch, but I feel like there's about 3 to 4 years right in between the beginning and now that were really important.
No, absolutely.
And without those, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, the meat and vegetables in that sandwich those were important years.
Very much so. But yeah, it sounds like then that, I think that we probably are thinking alike in that regard. Then it's just like I said, man. There's definitely things that I would have deleted too, but at the same time, there's so many. Yeah, the failing with some of those other things that I felt like I needed to scratch that itch with,
Yeah,
and just discovering that that really is not going to work that way, You're right. I wouldn't have been. I discovered squirrel hawking recently, even after, like 8 years, discovered how fun that is, like just now, that's like my only regret is that some of the things that were more practical and I should have been doing sooner, I wish I would have done sooner.
Well, it's like anyone that's lived around the country or lived in multiple places, like say you grew up your whole life next to Mount Rushmore, you probably don't go see Mount Rushmore. You probably saw it one time and you're like, whatever. Or sometimes you never go. Mm-hmm. Then when you move to like California, you're like, I want to take my kids to see Mount Rushmore. And it's like, I used to live there. I didn't go. Yeah. So like I recently, I went to the caverns in Missouri for the first time when I was living in New Mexico. Like, why didn't I go when I lived there? I don't know. So that squirrel hawking was always there for you. But now you're like, oh.
Yeah.
I should be doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I'd have discovered Mount Rushmore way earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah. And like, it's kind of funny too, because when I was in Cape Town recently, they one of the guys there, like, they took me to go and see like this nature preserve or one of these other places there, or game preserves or whatever. And the one guy is just like, yeah, I mean, I've lived here my whole life. I haven't even seen this yet. So have fun.
Yeah, that's funny. We both went to South Africa for the first time last year.
Yeah.
I was up in Limpopo, and
Yeah.
there was, I mean, Kruger National Park is only like a couple hours, but I did learn that a couple hours in South Africa is not a couple hours in
No.
United States at all. Those highways are different.
Did you see any of the fun hijacking area signs, like some of those warning signs that were scattered around? Yeah, did you go through some of those? And
I mean, we were with PHs the whole time. And
sure, yeah.
I did learn that, like, I guess locals just don't mess with PHs there. It's kind of probably like messing with a cattle farmer in Texas. Like, you want to turn the whole state on you, and go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But South Africa was an experience. I definitely want to go back. I didn't get to see any of the falconry there, unfortunately, but it did like open a whole new world for me. It was like playing a new generation of Pokemon. Like you're like, oh my God, like everywhere I look, like there's a new bug, there's a new bird, there's a new plant. I'm like, don't have good cell phone service. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, I haven't downloaded this Pokemon Go update yet. What the hell, man?
Oh, I haven't
been to this
played
gym
since
yet.
the super summer of Pokemon Go, but anyone that grew up with Pokemon probably understands like the metaphor there. It's everything is so different. There's nothing in common. The only things I found in common was like a little bit of the weather for me. Like New Mexico to South Africa didn't feel any. It was dry, arid, and some of the grass species, like there was purple 3 on and stuff. I was like, wow, it's the same exact grass.
Yeah.
That's cool. And one of the PHs is like, why do you know that? And I'm like, man, leave me alone. Like, grass is important if you want to learn quail. So
that's funny. Well, and it sounds like the area that you went to was kind of polar opposite from where I was at, because like the Western Cape is a lot more schizophrenic with the weather, and it rains like a crap ton there. And like they took me up kind of close, like on the top of another higher elevation area, and they were like, interesting fact, like there's more different species of vegetation on the side of this hill that we're on right now, or the side of this like mountain that we're on or whatever, than like the whole blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I probably won't be able to retain a lot of what you're telling me, but that's really interesting.
Yeah. No, where I was in South Africa, I mean, it looked like southern New Mexico, West Texas. It was dry, arid, everything was sharp. And I was like, it's only missing the rattlesnakes like that. But it was wild because there's so many ungulates. Everywhere you look, there's kudu and sable. And I was like, we have deer and elk and like pronghorn. That's all we got.
Yeah. And like I said, it sounds like, I mean, there's such a different contrast. And I mean, it is a large continent, so I guess it's reasonable to understand why it's so different in certain areas, obviously, but I mean, I was and we had the conversation a little bit ago too about just the poverty level there and stuff, and
that was jarring. I thought I knew poverty, seeing like bad parts of New Mexico and West Virginia. No. Don't hold a candle to like the bad parts of South Africa. Don't get me wrong, like the country's beautiful and the people are great, but poverty isn't a reflection of how the country is. Poverty's like, it's just a very real thing there.
Yeah. And I always thought, I mean, what I found interesting though was the amount of shanty towns that they have with like, the tin roofing and siding and stuff, but there's a satellite dish on every single one of them.
Or a generator.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
And the rolling blackout thing, I was like, this is
the power load shedding.
Load shedding. Yeah. And you had to like look up the schedule and change it every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Like we take things like that very much for granted here.
Yeah. If people in the US, could you imagine just the riots that would happen if like people in the US were told, look, your power is going to go out for 2 hours every single day for at least, I don't know, these
Well, it wasn't even
times.
just 2 hours. It was like 2 hours.
Well, it varied. Like some days were like 2 to 4, other days were like 2, and it was weird how they did it. But
Yeah, but there were some days where the power went out like 3 times in a day for 2 hours at a time. I'm like, man, Americans would lose their mind if they didn't have AC in Central Texas at noon on a Tuesday.
Yeah. It would be not good. No, they wouldn't sit very well. It also wouldn't sit very well too if people had to like, be resigned to the fact that like, okay, there's this merchandise caravan with these couple of trucks carrying like Samsung TVs and stuff, and we should probably not go by this particular overpass at a certain time because there's definitely going to be some people there waiting to ambush these trucks and, and like
the other one that was crazy was the money trucks.
Oh yeah.
They like straight up blow up like ATM trucks. I was like, yeah, we definitely don't have roadside bombing in the United States.
No. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm very much was surprised like you were. I was just, I was very, perspective altering and pretty humbling too.
Yeah, it's exactly the word, humbling. And like, it doesn't change my opinion of the place. Like, I will be back there next year, and I'll be back there next year for longer than I was this year. But it's just, I guess people don't understand it until they see it. But the same thing with the sheer size of that country, that continent.
Yeah.
I've driven coast to coast in the United States many times, and it is not like that country.
No, not at all. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to swing it. I mean, I was invited to Zimbabwe next year, and a couple of other guys from the other provinces and stuff have invited me to go. I don't know how I'm going to be able to pull it off or afford it, but I'm like you, man. I would love to go back.
Yeah, and I'd love to go back while I'm young. I don't want to go back when I'm.
Yeah.
And like I'm like same thing. Botswana and Zimbabwe, I was invited to, but like I want to see a lot more of South Africa.
Yeah.
Like it's like a whole new world for me. Let me explore this new map. This new DLC pack for me. Like I really want to see this too. I did get to like peek. So where we were in Limpopo was like right on the river. So like we could see into Botswana, and that was cool. We were hunting spurfowl, and I could hear hippos grunting. I saw a Nile River monitor. Like I was like, this is so cool. Like everywhere I look is so many things. There was lanner falcons and Cape vultures and the spurfowl and the Franklin and the guineas. And I got to see some crested guineas. I was like, I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, no, and that's why, whenever I was talking to those guys and they were like, yeah, I mean, we usually hunt this, and I was asking, like what different species they would hunt with this particular species or whatever, and they were telling me what birds, and I was just like, I'm gonna have to look all these damn things up. I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. But it's like I'm not familiar with most of those species over there. I've become a little bit more acquainted with them, but that's like, once again though, that's why I enjoy doing that stuff. I don't know. Some people just don't like traveling. I don't understand it.
No, like my parents don't leave.
Yeah.
Like for my dad to go like 15 minutes out of his town that he lives in is like a big deal.
Yeah. No, I feel you. And my wife doesn't really like to travel very much either, which is why I usually go solo on most of the stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Some people, I don't get it, man. It's a
I'm
big
very
world.
grateful to have a significant other that likes to travel and has a flexible work schedule. Lane, I mean, she tattoos, she makes her own schedule, but she loves to travel and she travels well, and like zero complaints, like just very down for flying by the seam of her pants. And like, I never thought I'd find that, and now that I have it, I'm like, wow, I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but for me to finally have it, I'm enjoying it, and I'm not going to take that for granted,
Yeah. It's, like I said, it provides some challenges in one regard, but in the other, I mean, I feel fortunate too that I also, have a wife that doesn't care that I'm gone so much also, like although I joke with people, after like 17, 18 years, I think she enjoys her time away from me anyway.
There's nothing wrong with that though either. Like some people are like jarred at that idea, and like different things work for different people. And like, if someone's significant other likes their alone time, like it's working for them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I love traveling with my significant other, and she loves her alone time. She likes to just draw and read and just kind of be alone. And I think that's good for everybody. Like, I drove 22 hours here by myself and I enjoyed it. I got to call friends around the country, check in on them. I made a last minute stopped at a buddy's house. It was an hour out of the way, but whatever. I'm driving cross country. Who cares? I'm not in a rush. And I don't know. I very much enjoy like just staring at the windshield and being able to control. Like when you're in a car by yourself for that long, you truly control your atmosphere for, do I want to call someone? Do I want to put on a book? Do I want to listen to music? Do I want to just stare into the void in complete solitude? Who cares? You can. And like, I don't know, I've learned to love it.
It's freedom.
It for me, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I feel you. And that's the main reason why I continue to do it as much as I do also, because I mean, and it's a lot easier to keep going with it once you're used to it instead of trying to go back to the alternative.
And don't get me wrong, if a buddy called me up and was like, yo, I'm gonna hop in the truck and we're gonna go, and I'm like, hell yeah. But I'm not gonna like cry and drag my heels because I gotta go alone. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's worth paying all the expenses, you know?
Yeah.
But no, well.
Yeah, you travel with the wrong person once and you're like, my evaluation process for a co-pilot has changed. Like,
yes.
I'm not
Yes.
like people that wait until you're an hour after you just got gas to let you know that they got to go to the bathroom. Like that's a quick way to get vetoed off my island. Like,
yeah,
no, this gas, food, and bathroom all in one stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I have a very quirky in some regards personality, and I have a lot of triggers, you know, and you know, the triggers, they get more amplified the more time that you spend by yourself too. Like,
oh, absolutely. I mean, it that translates to falconry. Like a bird that's used to flying alone with the same dog name, Skeeter, is like, if he's done it for 5 years, he's not going to like a new dog that does different things.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. But, well, I mean, I guess, you know, like I said, I mean, we could probably sit here and banter and catch up like for the rest of the day. But I want to kind of talk a little bit about kind of what the catalyst for making that phone conversation happen, and also, you know, just why we're kind of here a little bit. In that, I know I've been trying to, well, of course, people are going to probably hear this after the fact and the start of this series and stuff. But like, you know, I mean, Casey and Everett had been trying to talk about kind of organizing, you know, a series that is dedicated to people, you know, for, you know, that run dachshunds and use dachshunds in their falconry and stuff. And I know it's not, you know, because of where you're at now and everything, I know that that's not so much your wheelhouse now, but it used to be a huge part of your wheelhouse.
Yeah, it wasn't just my falconry, it was my work too.
Yeah.
And I miss the little things. I appreciate them. I have a great amount of respect for them, but I'm also fair enough in my assessment of what I'm doing that like dachshunds don't fit anymore for what I'm doing. And I learned that through a few hard lessons, but it's nice to just admire it from afar now. And I love seeing their popularity grow. And it all goes back to Teddy. I talk about leaving your mark on something. Teddy left her mark on that. But like Teddy's not just respected in the falconry world. She's respected in like the terrier world, like by some of the hardest hunting terrier men I know. Like you will never hear him say a lick of anything but admiration for Teddy and her days hunting foxes and groundhogs with little dachshunds and a lurcher. And like I don't know if she still has lurchers, but like people like Sean O'Neill and some of the most well-respected people digging to terriers to this day, like, look at Teddy like a legend. I mean, she is a legend, but like, it's cool. I love when people gas each other up. I love when people sing praise. Like, it's so easy to be overcome by negativity in today's society. So like, when I just hear people that are just singing people's praise all the time and have nothing but nice things to say about other people. It's cool to see. And then I've never heard nothing but high praise for Teddy, and I have nothing but high praise for Teddy. And Teddy's had dogs from me. It's gone full circle, and that circle matters in dogs. The person that gets you into a dog and a type of dog, and then you put a dog back in that person's hands, like that full circle isn't talked about enough, and I think it should be. Like 10 years ago, I saw Sheldon Nicole's setter with his peregrine hunt, and I was like, I will own that breed one day. I love that breed. On the way here, I dropped his new setter puppy off from my dogs. Like, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, dang, Sheldon had a dog named Lizzie 10 years ago, and she's passed, and now I just put the new generation back in his hands. Like it went full circle. So it was cool of Casey to organize this, and I hope we can get Teddy on to talk about it. I don't know if you have plans to talk.
I've already done one with Teddy.
Awesome. Yeah. I can't wait to hear it. I mean, you can read Teddy's articles back in the old Hound magazines of Full Cry. Like Teddy's been there, done that, has all the t-shirts.
Well, and it's funny because, like it was meeting Teddy, at the dachshund field trials that I told you about, and that whole experience that was kind of like, in that conversation with her, that I was just like, and she was the one that initially, brought up Casey, and I already knew of Casey, of course, through social and everything, but like she was the one that gave me his info. She's like, yeah, you should, call him too or whatever. And so, that meeting with her and that whole experience that I had with her at the field trials and stuff was really, I mean, for me, the inspiration on my end of all of this is the why I wanted to kind of try and put this series together, was because I've found, I have Vizslas also. And, if I would have had anything to do over again, that would have probably been one of them. I mean, I love my Vizslas and stuff, but for what I like to do and for our area and stuff, like the dachshunds are definitely, for what I like to do, like a much better choice.
And I agree with that from afar. Like, if I was still here, if you told me I had to move back here tomorrow, I'd pick up a couple dachshunds and add a few more terriers and maybe a beagle, and I'd party. That's the way to do it here. For
sure. And, but what I didn't expect to enjoy them this much. And, to be 100% honest, I knew that I would like it, knew that I would enjoy it, but I didn't realize how much self-gratification that I would get from watching them develop the way they have. And once I saw that and, wanted to start doing some of the field trial stuff, and then of course met Teddy, and then, the more I've kind of gotten into the world a little bit, like I said, I for whatever reason, I was just inspired. I wanted to talk to more people that, that have run or are currently running dachshunds. So,
well, it's just like falconry meets dog trials. Even if you're not into trials, even if you don't care about ribbons or placements, you're putting names to faces. You're meeting people from around the world, and you're going to meet a lot of people that you don't even see on social media. And if you're finally meeting your internet friends, and you're solidifying that relationship. And that's why I go to trials. I don't care if my dogs come here and win nothing. I've been belly laughing for 3 days, and I got to see a lot of people that are here for the same reason, They're into the dogs. So it's cool to see. It's cool to see people go down that path. Like, I got a dog, and now I'm going to get into more dog things. And then it turns out you're like, dang, I really like other dog people, I've got a Vizsla just like you. I've only got one, Trigger. He's 8 now. And, I've gone full tilt into the setters now, but I'll always hold a special place in my heart and falconry for Vizslas. But like you said, for here, dachshund is hard to beat.
Yeah. And, kind of going back on your prior experiences, I know, I of course, was around, Zoid a little bit when you still had him, and, kind of got a very, very small snapshot of, seeing him work with you, like on your job too, but I mean, kind of, I guess, discuss a little bit more about, what made that so, I guess, special, to you in that regard, not just in your falconry, but your work career as well.
So I mean, a mini dachshund is the closest thing you're gonna get, or a Canesian, or whatever the verbiage you want to use, is the closest thing you're gonna get to legal ferreting in the United States. And a 6 to 8 pound little dachshund can get some places. And in my work, I was doing a lot of attics, and I was doing a lot of crawl spaces, and I was doing dead animal removals. And like I've said many times, the government spent billions or millions, if not billions of dollars trying to recreate a dog's nose. A dog is you're not going to replace it. You're not going to beat a dog with anything else for what we want. And I started using dogs in work and clearing attics, and Zoid was the first dog I had done it with. And to me, that was the dog that opened this like locked golden door that I didn't know existed. And like now I do the same work with terriers just because the terriers fit better for where I'm at. But like there's a dachshund would fit very well for my work still, but they wouldn't fit my hunting still. And so the Zoid was very special in that regard. And then Zoid was the first dog I ever titled. Zoid, I put a field championship on Zoid, and then through social media and through photos and through videos, a lot of people kind of built a following around Zoid. And I didn't realize how big it was until Zoid passed away. Just people came out of the woodwork, and just to say like Zoid's the reason I have a dachshund today. And I've heard that more than once. And that to me is what makes Zoid so special. Like hearing that a dog I owned once upon a time changed someone else's like entire trajectory in dogs and in falconry or in hunting. That to me is incredible, and irreplaceable. And Teddy's the reason I had Zoid. So like it's a chain effect. And I mean, dogs definitely dog breeds come into vogue throughout falconry years. Like some years the dachshunds are the hot dog, or the cockers, or the deckers, or whatever. But that's why Zoid will always be special for me. And then the funny thing about Zoid, and a lot of people don't even really know this, Zoid didn't really like anybody. Zoid only liked me.
He was a bit of an ass.
Yeah, and he was an ass. He was very spicy. And knowing what I know now about dogs, I probably wouldn't have liked Zoid as much had I got him now as I did then. I've had a lot of different dogs over the years, so like, but Zoid was still the dog for me that started it all, and I'll always pay homage to that, you know.
Yeah, and I think you bring up kind of a good point too, as far as like, I look back and think about things that I thought were awesome at the time, but the more you go and the more like experience you have with certain things, you look back and you're like, it really wasn't near as special as I thought it was, like that particular bird that I had, or dog, or whatever. And then like fast forward however many years, you hear about the same type of person talking about, you know, something similar about this amazing bird or amazing dog or whatever they have and stuff. And you can't help but kind of smile internally.
Yeah.
Because like, you're like, out of your just huge wealth of experience, right, to be able to make that judgment. And then, but what makes it funny is you remember doing it yourself, you know?
Yeah. You relate, and not enough to say anything, but enough, like you said, to smile to yourself, and they're going to learn.
So you didn't have any other dachshunds after Zoid then?
No, that's not true. I had Zoid. I had a son of Zoid named Stitch. I had his brother Bender. I had Wing.
I totally remember now. You mentioned that you ended up having to, once you moved, you had to relocate or
yeah. So when I moved, I had a few close calls with coyotes, and I didn't want that bad ending. So I had sold Zoid's son. There was a fiasco with Wing, which was a co-ownership fiasco. So I had to give Wing to someone unrelated to the situation. And then a son of Zoid's went to Nathan Danforth in Arizona, and that dog got killed by a rattlesnake. And that left me with, at that point, I had one dachshund left. It was my standard. It was my Teckle Vader. And it's hard to replace a dachshund. They're not, you're going to wait a year most of the time. And litters are 2 to 6.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you might wait 2 years. I didn't want Nate to have to wait longer. So I'd loaned him Vader. And then once I saw how good Vader was doing with Nate and how much Nate enjoyed Vader, I just called him up one day and I said, if you just pay what I have into him, you can keep him. And that was the last of the dachshunds for me. Vader did a little bit better than the minis where I'm at in the desert. And by a little bit better, he actually did a lot better. He just a much faster dog, and it's much more open where I'm at. And he was very true to voice. So at that point, I was just left with a Yag Terrier, and I realized that the Terriers are a little bit less likely to get killed by coyotes and a little bit more able to cover ground in open ground where I'm at. Like out here, a dachshund's going to cover more ground faster because they can just run right under it. And a Terrier is slowed down by the cover, but it's the inverse out there.
Yeah, like I said, I wondered about kind of the subtle differences there. I mean, I assume that's probably what the main reason was, why you decided to go the route that you did. And I heard you talking about it some this weekend too, but yeah, no, I as far as, like the other aspects of like dachshund ownership though, I have to ask you because I mean, there's probably going to be other people throughout the series that I'm going to ask too, but did you ever experience just like, I mean, what is it about small breeds, particularly dachshunds, that just make them almost impossible to like 100% potty train, like housebreak? They just, I don't know if other people have had these issues or if it's just, but everybody that I've talked to has had some degree of issues with
the mini dachshunds. Vader, I never had the issues with Vader, but that's a dog that weighs twice as much. Mm-hmm. With the minis, the only time I really truly had 100% potty trained dogs was with dog doors. To like you can get like sliding glass door inserts into like a 4x4 cube just so they can go outside. And I don't know if they're too stubborn to hold it or
just stubborn.
yeah, they're definitely, I think they're just too stubborn to hold it. Like Zoid, when he was like older, like 4 or 5 years old, if he heard you wake up and he was in his kennel and you didn't let him out before you made coffee, he was going to go to the bathroom, even in his kennel, or right in front of the back door. And if it was raining, he was going for the bathroom right in front of the back door. And that's when I said, you know what, I'm just going to put a dog door in. And my issues went away when I put the dog door in. But if I went to visit anybody's house, same thing. It's back to square one. I'm definitely a lot better at training dogs now than I was then, but that was how I solved that. And I've heard it from many, many people.
Yeah. I just wanted to get your take on that because, I some people just don't have them inside also, I know. I know a
lot of people that keep them like beagles.
Yeah. And they just, they'll still go outside and spend time with them and this, that, and the other. And they even build like, Cadillac, kennels for them and stuff, to keep them in and all that. But I know like, as far as, I know Feliciano told me about, the belly band deal and stuff, and that helped a lot with, the males. Because I mean, that was one thing they did constantly. I mean, Hades, he started marking when he was like 6 months old, and he still does. Like, he'll still try, and Horace is starting to do it now too. And it's just like, I'm so glad that someone told me about that.
I mean, that's my aversion to males in general. It's not even marking inside, it's marking in general. Nothing worse than having your bags by the truck right before you leave, and the dog comes outside and pisses on your bag right in front of you and just looks you in the eye and does it. Like, I have 14 dogs currently, and 13 of them are female for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, once again, if I had known better, I might have gone a different route also. But like, it just so happened that what was available to me were males, and now that I have males, I'm going to keep probably getting males until I don't have them anymore.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with dachshunds. Like you've waited like here's a scenario: you waited a year for a litter. There's two,
Mhm.
and they're both male.
Mhm.
Do you roll your deposit into the next litter, or do you just suck it up and get a male? Most people are just going to suck it up and get a male.
Mhm.
I would suck it up and get it. If I had waited a year, and it's the right breeding, I'm gonna get that dog.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not like a Saluki or a short hair litter that there's 11 puppies to pick from.
Right.
There might be 2.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not waiting to get like a golden doodle, or
Yeah.
or whatever.
And there's not a lot of people breeding them, and even the ones that are, like, they only have 3 or 4 dogs, so that's maybe 1 to 2 litters a year.
Yeah, well, especially people breeding them for what we want to use them for.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, breeding them to do, and there's a lot of people in the dachshund trial world that don't even run them outside of a rabbit pen. That's fine and dandy, whatever floats their boat, but that falconry people need to know a little bit more information, and you could strike gold getting dogs from those lines, absolutely, but me personally, knowing what I know about dogs, is I'm going to buy a dog from someone that I saw both parents hunt outside of a fenced pen 100 times before I buy a dog that's the owner can't even control and has to chase down and catch in a fenced pen. Like I'm good.
Yeah. Well, and something else I like to ask people too, with a lot of experience, especially with the smaller breeds and stuff, is when do you like to get your pup? Do you like to wait till closer to the 12-ish week mark? Or
there's a big asterisk on my answer here,
Yeah.
and I've raised a lot of dogs. I've raised a few dozen dogs in my life now, and if I know the person whelping it, and I know how they whelp dogs, and I know they're going to go out there and put hands on these dogs every day, and I know they're going to keep them clean and start them the way I'd start them, I don't care when I get it.
Yeah.
But if they're the opposite and they just keep them out in a dirty pen, or they only clean them once a day when they get home from work, and these dogs are somewhere on the back 40 in a pen and don't get really hands put on them much, I will be there at 6.5, 7 weeks at their door. No excuses. Here I am. I want my dog. I want my dog now. And I'm not even going to pay a hauler to grab it, because I want to prevent a dog learning bad habits as soon as I can. And I think dogs whelped clean tend to be cleaner dogs later on in life. And I know a few dog people I respect that kind of align with that belief. So
yeah. Well, and I do agree with that, and I appreciate you, clarifying, that, because that's something that a lot of people haven't gone into greater detail in describing, because like I know both of mine, I was fortunate to at least have people that were always around and were constantly working with them. And, one of the big selling points of me getting, Horace was because he, came from a breeder who was a falconer also, and he was already training him, to, on rabbits and stuff, and doing all these things. So, I was happy to get both of my dogs around that 12 to 13 week, mark. And
because they had those good 4 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And and it saved me a month of also like just
a hard month.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. A pure hell.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, yeah.
So a small dog at 8 weeks old is a lot more than a Vizsla or a setter or any other breed. They're very different dogs.
Well, and conversely, I got my older Vizsla, Shay. I got her at 8 weeks, and then I got Blitz a little bit probably earlier than what I should have. It was probably closer to like 7.
You probably had their systems figured out in like a week.
Well, but that week though was way more miserable.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely.
but
doing the same thing with like a dachshund would have been.
Yeah. I'm sure it would have been way worse. Yeah, for sure. But anyway, no, like I said, I like getting people's takes on that, because I have gotten I won't say very different, but I've not gotten the same answer twice. I don't think really, as far
that's
as
cool to hear.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the reason I breed dogs. because I know how they're whelped, and I whelp them the way I want to whelp them, and I can pick the dog that I want. If I'm breeding a litter that I want a dog out of, I'm gonna get the dog I want, and I don't care what anyone says, and that's a huge. So yeah, no, that's cool to hear that you're even asking that. I love topics that are like, they seem so small, but like they're actually
so freaking important.
They're so important. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and you wouldn't know they were important until you've experienced how important they are.
No, exactly. Yeah, I've had some dogs that'll blow bubbles in their own piss, and like,
God.
And it's a reflection of how they were whelped. I will take that to my grave.
Yeah. Well, and that's very possible. I mean, yeah, like I said, I've learned a lot, and you know, I still am very honest. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself to be an A+ dog handler still by this point, but I do feel like I've learned a lot, you know, between the Vizslas and the Dachshunds now and stuff. And, you know, I mean, the Vizsla, I mean, especially Shay, I mean, she got really attached to me. So she had some separation anxiety issues and things that I had to work through, you know, and even now she'll still get points where she'll, like, you know, just throw up, you know, in her kennel and stuff if she's been away, you know, from me for a while and things like that. And
part of that's a Vizsla thing.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's just part of the breed. I mean, they get so attached. And but you know, I mean, like I said, I mean, I like I like doing my part to some degree and trying to save some other people some extra grief, you know. So I like asking stuff like that because I wish that I would have heard other people talk about it first.
Yeah, I didn't hear about it until I went through hell. Yeah. And I had a conversation with one of my best friends, Chad Reynolds, who's a very world respected dog handler, and he was like, it was something he said with like the utmost, like, this is important. And I was like, damn, if he's that picky about it. So yeah, it's something I'm picky about now too.
Yeah. And I look forward to listening to some, I got a chance to finally really actually sit and listen to a few of those episodes now. And I'm going to start listening to that podcast more. I think it's pretty neat. And I've just a few that I've listened to, I've already, you know, heard them talk about stuff that I wouldn't have, you know, it's like kind of connected some dots and stuff. That's pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah, one of my favorite things they do on his podcast is they have a running thing now. It's called Keep or Cull. Mm-hmm. And it's not like hard cull. It's not like take the dog out back and end it. Just get rid of. And I love hearing different dog handlers' opinions on would you get rid of this dog if it does these things? Right. And they're always such great questions. So
if nothing else, it definitely makes you think.
Yeah, they're thought provoking.
Yeah, for sure. But well, like, is there anything else before we switch topics again that you want to add about dachshunds in particular, about your experience with them that we may have just either glossed over or not even mentioned? I mean, like I said, we've known each other for a while now, so we're going to kind of probably be all over the place with conversation because, you know, but what about like, have you ever had any preferences with, you know, color or, you know, whatever, or is all that kind of stuff still just, you know, personal preference, like as far as just the, you know, just some of the different color variations and things like that? Or
so I kind of have my own stance on color, and it relates to another dog. I waited 6 years to get a Saluki, not because Salukis weren't available. I wanted a light colored Saluki. I got a lot of dogs. And if I'm going to feed a dog and look at a dog for 15 years, it's going to fit the image of the dog that I had in my kennel. And a lot of Saluki people didn't like that because I was offered black dogs throughout the years. And I was like, I don't want a black Saluki. I'm not in a rush to get a Saluki. And when I get one, it's going to look the way I want. And a lot of people get, well, if you're picking color, you're picking for the wrong reasons. I don't like that. A dog is a 15-year commitment sometimes. Get the dog that you want to look at. My dad always said life's too short to hunt behind an ugly dog. So if it's a dog you perceive as ugly, don't get it. You know, because they're going to piss you off some days, and the way they look might be their saving grace. I like red dachshunds. But it's not just that I like red dachshunds. I think, or from what I've seen, the red dachshunds have thinner coats, and I like less coat on a dachshund. I don't want a running little mop. And and it's nothing against the little running mops. I mean, you can groom them, but from what I've seen over dachshunds over the years, the red ones have less coat than the black and tan ones. And that to me is enough reason to justify. And I think the red's easier to see. So I've had black and tan ones and I've had red ones, but the ones I bred and kept for myself were always red for a reason. And that's what I liked, you know?
Yeah.
I do see a lot more black and tans these days than I do red ones. And I don't know, maybe more people like black and tan, and if that's the case, good for them. But my personal opinion is I like red little mini dachshunds. Now the Teckles, when you switch into the standards, I like the black and tan ones. The red ones, to me, I don't know, they don't do it for me. I think the red wire coated standards are ugly, and I'll go on the record to say that.
Well,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No. And like I said, I appreciate it when people can just sometimes give an answer of like, I don't have a good reason. I just like that, you know? I mean,
I think a black and tan wire looks nice, whereas a red or whatever, boar, I think they call it, it's ugly. It's gray. It looks like a dingy mop. That might be a little mean, but that's just that's how I view it. And, part of the reason I have English setters right now and why they're my main focus is I find them striking. Like I very rarely look at an English setter on point and don't feel the same way I felt the first time I saw it. I think they're gorgeous dogs. I think they're much prettier than English pointers. And if you go by like the trials or the averages, the average pointer is a better dog than the average setter. Cool. I think setters look 100 times better. So I don't hold it, and I know I'm not in the majority on my opinion of that, but like I don't hold it against someone, whether they've been in dogs 10 minutes or 10 years, that has a preference on how their dog looks. Like we get to pick, and if I like how it looks, I'm gonna like it a lot more.
My goal is to eventually have one of each color variation. And, I mean, as long as, of course, they do what I want them to do and everything. But like, you know, I have noticed that there are some things about like, you know, my black and tan, you know, Hades, there's some things about his coat that I both like and dislike versus, you know, my dapple Horus, you know, like there's aspects about both of their coats that I both like and dislike.
Yeah.
And
eventually you'll find which one you really truly like more, but
and that's also a big reason why I want a red also eventually. It's because like, you know, like I
all the colors are shiny, dude.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, it's just like, and yeah, I don't know which one I'm going to end up preferring in the end. I mean, so far I've always thought dapples look the neatest. But like, once again, it's kind of like what you said. I mean, it's whatever. But no, man. Like I said, I didn't know if there was any other thing in particular that we should brush on or kind of broach before we switch topics or whatever. But that was the only other thing that came to mind.
I'm glad we looped back to that because like that's another one of those conversations that like people don't. They're just like, I just want a dog. And I'm like, there's more to picking a dog. How it's whelped, what it looks like, its color, its coat.
Well, and I think that kind of a bummer, too, is that I know that people there are breeders that have kind of started, you know, to kind of breed more for color than ability and stuff, too. And
that part is definitely a bummer. And I agree with that. Like, and I'm not condoning that. But what I'm not condoning, or what I am condoning is, I see a lot of breeders blacklist people. Like, well, this person, the first thing they asked about was color. Mm-hmm. And they like write them off as being inexperienced or silly. And they're not. And you shouldn't blacklist them and you shouldn't write them off. If someone called me tomorrow and said, I want to try color setter and I'm willing to wait for one, I'll get them one. But like, I'm not going to hold that. I'm not going to hold that against them. And if you got on a list for a dachshund and you were like, I want a red one, and I will wait until I get a red one, I don't think that should be held against you, and I don't think that should be held against anyone. Yeah. So, no, I'm glad we circled around to that. It's another thing that I don't think enough new people get it. Like, no one defends them in their decision to be specific, and so.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I mean, if you can't think of anything else, then before we get too much further, too, I mean, as you know, I mean, one of the things that we like to talk about, on the podcast too, is just, how people got their start. And I know you've probably talked about this so many times and everything, but they may have not actually heard like in your voice, what like we inspired you to get into falconry and stuff, but like just talk about, your path and discovering it and, what made you want to get into it.
So I went to a Texas Hawking Association meet in 2012 in Waco. I was in the Army then, and I'd gotten to see Sheldon Nicole, who had a peregrine with his setter, and then I also saw people flying Harris hawks on squirrels with dogs. And at the time, seeing the hawks work in tandem with the dogs was really what like set the hook. And then watching Harris hawks grunt and communicate with dogs, I didn't even realize what I was witnessing at the time. And like those subtleties in falconry of dog hawk or dog falcon communication, another thing that aren't really talked about, that really set the hook. And from there, I mean, I bought every book I could. I spent time reading Yahoo groups and scrubbing NAFEX and was obsessed. And like, even when I deployed overseas in the Army, I took a Pelican case of nothing but falconry books. And I just read them over and over and over again. And I painted this picture in my head. I was like, someday I want to fly a goshawk on a pheasant and I want my dog laying down in the background. And I saw a goshawk on a rooster pheasant. I think it was like a Wiesel in the background. And I eventually got to do that. And it was just like a accumulation of like a 10-year wanting to do something. Like, we don't have a lot of those in life. We don't have a lot of long-term goals that you achieve. And so when you finally achieve it, even to me, like, or to anyone else, like, I saw this photo and I wanted to recreate it. That sounds so silly, but like it meant a lot to me to go to Montana and catch a rooster pheasant with my first imprint goshawk over my Wiesel. And I have that photo, and like, it's not even that good of a photo, but like, to me, it's like super important. And I had that's what got me into falconry. And then even now, like, when I relate back to the Harris hawks communicating with dogs and dogs communicating with Harris hawks, chasing squirrels in tandem, and then you have bloodthirsty falconers thrown in that mix. I see that now in quail hawking, and I've had my last goshawk hash brown, when dog would go on point, once hash brown was like catching quail every day, he would like stand up on the glove, he'd start peeping, and he would start making these little vocalizations that were outside of his regular like vocabulary. And it was like an excitement peep that he just saw that dog slam on point and he knows what's next. And it even evolved. If he was like a slightly less or slightly lower in weight than I wanted him, and he was like a little bit more yarricked up, he would fly to the dog 300 yards, 500 yards, and just leave me behind it. At that point, I was no longer relevant to this hawk, and he learned that the dog going on point meant a covey rise was about to happen. And he would fly to the dog and hover up, and I'd release the dog verbally, running out of breath, and the quail would flush. And at that point, and then sometimes he'd put a quail in, and the dog and him would reflush it on their own without me, just as I show up. And like, that to me was like, dang, there's a full circle that had just been made in me getting into falconry and me doing not only what got me in, but something completely different, but it's the same. So the dog hawk communication thing. So yeah, that was my start, and that's where I'm at now.
Well, and I guess branching now into where you're at now and where you have been for a little while. I mean, I obviously the quail hawking and aspect of falconry is what's turning your crank and has turned it for a while. I mean, is that what you think you're going to continue to do, like, indefinitely? Or I know you mentioned that you were wanting to do, some other things with goshawks and stuff. I mean, do you think though that the quail is always going to be part of your falconry from here on out?
It might not be quail, but it will be upland. It will be upland birds. And that's the cool thing about flying upland birds, and that's the cool thing about goshawks, is every state west of the Mississippi has some form of upland birds. So whether I'm hawking Huns and Sharptail in Montana with a goshawk and a dog, or hawking Chucker over a dog with a goshawk in Nevada, like, there's enough difference between species of upland bird for me to like that's going to turn my crank for a long time. And catching a quail now still feels like the first one, and it hasn't worn off, and I don't see it wearing off. Like seeing dogs go on point and then another dog slam into an honor still raises hairs on my spine, and I don't, and then to have a hawk go in and catch it after. And don't get me wrong, I love gun hunting over my dogs, and that to me is relaxing. But catching quail over my dogs is what like makes me wake up in the morning. And like when I want to relax, a nice peaceful hunt with my dogs and a shotgun. But like adding a hawk is like that is my lifeblood. That's my thing, you know. So I do eventually want to fly like a big female goshawk over 2 Salukis on some jackrabbits, like kind of like Dave Canellis is doing with his whippet and his windhound or whatever. That's not really done. Like I've seen Chad Reynolds do it with his Gyr Falcon over Salukis and Hungarian Greyhounds and other types of sighthounds. I've seen Greg Rayborn do it. I've seen Terrence do it. And that stuff's really cool. I just don't know if me and falcons really communicate on the same like plane. So like I want to do that same thing, but with a goshawk. I would love to try it with a larger falcon someday like they do. I get to see enough of it that like the itch is, it doesn't itch right now. It's there, but I get to see it a lot. Like when they go to NAFA meets and those guys fly their big falcons over sighthounds. And I mean, it's just as attractive to other falconers as going out with the eagles. I get to see it at home enough, and I'm very grateful for that. But for now, it's what I'm doing is what I want to keep doing. This year, I'd like to go catch more sharptails and catch chucker and catch huns and stuff in the early season before our quail season really gets going.
Yeah. And I mean, you've flown, just obviously Hash Brown was pure North American, right?
He was a pure North American from New Mexico.
I mean, what are your thoughts then as far as your preferences, between like the hybrids and pure North American? And I mean, have you had enough experience to
I don't have a
determine,
deep enough well to draw from to really I would cast gaze on someone with my amount of experience making that judgment. And it really irks me when I see people like that have flown like one fin and one North American being like, oh, the fins are so much better. And it's like, how do you know you just weren't a better falconer when you got your hands on that fin? Like go back to the North American or something. I'd love to pull a North American again from the Gila, and I loved my North American enough to fly another one. Now my current Beautyoides Cross, I really like it, but I've also learned a lot of lessons from my North American. So I don't, is the bird in front of me currently a better bird because of my advancement in falconry, or is it a better bird because they're just more chill, easier going goshawks, which are now a separate species? I don't know. So I don't really have a preference. I don't have enough experience to really say I have a preference.
Yeah.
I flew a hand-me-down North American female. I flew a chamber race 50-50 cross. I've flown a Siberian female on loan, and then I've raised 3 imprints myself and flown 2 of them. One of the imprints was flown by someone else, but I raised it and hacked it. And so I don't have the experience to really pick a side, really. To me, though, we have wild take, and we should be very appreciative of it, and we should utilize it. So that's definitely a rite of passage for me, like finding a wild goshawk, pulling a wild goshawk, training and being successful. My end goal was to let it go, and I didn't get there, but I still think everybody that flies goshawks should pull a wild one at some point in their life. There's enough states where it's open. There's no reason not to. It'll cost you the same financially. A couple weeks off work is the same price as you'd pay to buy one.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ends up being a wash. It really is just, it's kind of like going back to the dog world. Is just, what's your preference? Do you prefer imprint or a chamber bird, or, and then, all that kind of stuff too. And
there's a falconer up in Washington, Josh Davis, and dude's a go-getter. Like if someone tells him he can't do it, he does it. And I love his training updates on his, like he took a deaf dog and made it a nice bird dog. Like, and everyone was like, oh, don't waste your time. And I love that about Josh. And he got a Yag that he made into an incredible falconry dog. And he recently he trapped a family bird from a goshawk nest site. And I've been loving following that. Like every time he sends me an update, I love following that. And like, because that's such a different experience than what I had, you know. He not only found a nest, he monitored it, he watched him, and then like right when that bird should be at dispersal age, he went out there and he trapped a few. Well, I don't know if he trapped a few of them, but he trapped the one he kept. And obviously, if he had trapped other ones, he let him go. But he's training it right now, and that's so cool to me. I love like he made it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and before once again we kind of switch topics again. Like, I mean, is there anything else that you want to mention about, you know, quail hawking specifically, since it's been such a big part of your life the last like handful of years? That, I mean, what aspects of like the quail falconry is it like, other than, you know, the point and, you know, like, you know, the other aspects that make the, you know, the hair raise on your neck and all that kind of stuff? I mean, why do you still prefer that? Because I mean, there are a lot of things about quail hunting that are kind of a turn off to some people. I mean, myself in particular, I wouldn't want flights that are that long and stuff, you know, but like,
and that's the quail hawking I created, you know, like, and when people hear quail hawking, they group it all as this one encompassing topic, and it's not. Montezuma quail in New Mexico is very different than Montezuma quail in southeastern Arizona. Catching Gambel's quail in Albuquerque, New Mexico is very different than catching Gambel's quail in northwestern Arizona. Bobwhite in Missouri are different than the bobwhite here at this trial in Kentucky that we've been seeing this whole weekend. And each species of quail is a unique quarry. There are similarities, but for example, Montezuma quail, they're probably the easiest to get steady dog work on, but they're hardest for the dogs to learn and find. And even though they might be the fastest quail in the long run, because of their bigger wing loading size, they fly the most honest for a goshawk or a Cooper's hawk and allow themselves to be caught in the air more consistently than, say, a Gambel's quail or a bobwhite that tends to use cover if it has it available. So a lot of people have this like image of quail hawking of like, you're going to run really far and then you're going to dig a quail out and throw it to your bird. That's so far from covering all of quail hawking that it like pains me to see. And the elephant in that room too is, even if your bird is flying quail very far and putting it into cover and it does get dug out, you got to have a dog that, one, found the quail, two, you had to know where that quail is, and you had to have a bird that flew it hard enough to put it into that cover. So like, so what if a falconer rewards their bird for doing that? And there's very polarizing views on both sides of that coin, but you gotta be successful before you can add style and do it better. So like that always missed me. And just in New Mexico alone, we have 4 species of quail. I have 4 species of quail within a 3-hour radius of my house. And they're all very dependent. It's so terrain dependent, just like rabbit hawking. Rabbit hawking in Western Kentucky, where we're at right now, is probably very different than it is in Northeastern Maine, or I got to see rabbit hawking down in South Georgia with Sean Derrick and his beagles and yags. And he's flying a goshawk and stuff people told him he was crazy to do, and he's doing it well, and he's doing it over like a dozen beagles, and it's rad. But you need a dozen beagles down there. It's waves and waves of briar. So what I'd really want to just hit on is that quail hawking is very different. It's terrain dependent and species dependent. And then it changes too once you change the birds you're flying on them too. Like, I learned very quickly in New Mexico that flying scaled quail out in the open rolling grasslands with a falcon is night and day than a goshawk. They don't even want to fly for a falcon, whereas a goshawk, they'll get up and go 800 yards if they can. And you'll get into the coveys and you'll learn, like, each coveys have like a little bit different characteristics too. Like, I have some coveys that I know if I don't get them on the initial, I'm not getting them. You're not getting them out. They're going to be like homing missiles to the most quail Catraz pack rat fortress. It's not even worth digging out if you could. And then I also have coveys where like I'll take a new bird because I know they're going to dump into like some sage that's waist high or some juniper, and you can get a clean reflush out of that stuff. And it's great for a new bird, you know. I don't mind taking a seasoned bird where they have to catch it on the first. And then there's some quail that people see quail the most in the desert near the neighborhoods, and they act like that's the only place to find quail, but what they won't admit is they're just not that good at finding quail, and their dogs aren't that good. Because I've never gone anywhere that has urban quail and been skunked 3 miles outside of neighborhoods. Like, I'm talking go miles into the desert, and those same quail are still there, I promise. You got to have the dog power, and that's why my string of dogs is so deep, is because if you really want to like be able to catch quail anywhere, especially in the desert, you got to have the ability to run fresh dogs that might not have hunted yesterday, that run big and cover some country. And that's why I've been so supportive, and I've been trying to get more and more people into quail hawking, is because what I've seen over the last few years is lots and lots of people realizing that there's a million ways to skin the quail hawking cat. Like there's people in California that are figuring it out. There's people in southwestern Arizona that are figuring it out, and I love it. I'm here for it, and I will help them along the way. I loan them dogs. I'll give them dogs, and it's cool seeing them figure out, like Nate Danforth and Brian Wood flying side by side in the same area. Nate flying a goshawk and Brian flying a Cooper's hawk, and they share each other's dogs and share fields and stuff. But like seeing them figure out the Arizona or the southwestern part of Arizona component of it is really cool. And they've been branching out and catching Montezuma quail, and they quickly realized that catching Montezuma quail with their birds was very different than catching the Gamble's quail in their backyard. And so it's cool to see other people like step into that, and like I hope that trend continues. Like my past apprentice, I guess I don't know how to word that. He was my apprentice, not an apprentice anymore. He flies a goshawk, Dalton. He's flying quail in the same area I live in, and his goshawk that he raised last year, in my opinion, like if you were comparing flight to flight, flies quail as good as Hash Brown did in his third season, and that to me is really impressive. But he learned really quickly that you really got to have the dog power where we live to really produce consistent quail slips. So he started adding dogs, and he used to just borrow my dogs every day, and like he lives close enough that it wasn't a big deal. But I've been loving seeing other people figure it out, and I love to have a hand in helping them too. So when people hear quail hawking, they just assume it's all the same, and it is so different. It's not even funny. So I could go on about that one for days.
I'm sure.
I've never had a chance to, because like I said earlier, other podcasts that I've done in the past have never been a falconry specific podcast. So it's always like, well, how do you get a bird, and how do you keep it coming back to you? And then you just answer those questions on repeat. And anyone who's been a falconer more than a day gets those too. So it's cool to finally be able to delve into that.
Cool. Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm glad that finally had the chance to do it, and that, like I said, that's the reason why I wanted to give you, the chance to, I don't know, quantify that more, so to speak, because, to be honest, I hadn't really even seen quail hawking in person until recently, until when I went to Mexico. And, it's kind of funny, you're joking about, it's just like, well, you could have seen that, here or whatever, and I was just like, but I'm in Mexico now. It's like, but I had to have, I don't know, like I knew that there had to have been like differences, because even just the short time that I was there, and like Rodrigo and those guys took me to see some of that stuff. And then like when I went back earlier this year and saw, quail hawking with some other species, like the aplomatos and peregrines and stuff like that, and seeing how they hunted these birds, from species to species and stuff with some of the different ones they have. Like, I knew that it couldn't have been as cut and dry.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. And I mean, and it was blatantly obvious, that it wasn't, So, I mean, like I said, it's probably for the best that you got a chance to, clarify all of that, because, there are subtle things here and there, especially when people are trying to figure out all the different things that we were trying to figure out not more than a handful of years ago.
Yeah.
It's considerations.
Yeah.
People need to think about these things.
Yeah, I got humbled really hard when I moved from Missouri to New Mexico. Finding bobwhite consistently, the cover's thick and it's thorny and stuff like that. But bobwhite are pretty consistent generally. Mm-hmm. And then moving to New Mexico and then switching to scaled quail, the dogs I had at the time for bobwhite in Missouri were not the best dogs for scaled quail where I moved to in New Mexico. And I learned really quick that big running dogs have an application, and it was not Missouri, but it definitely is New Mexico. If you want to find scaled quail without marking them from a car or hawking just neighborhoods, you got to have some dogs that are going to cover some ground. And the thing gun hunters don't understand about falconry is I don't have all day to go look for quail when I got a hungry goshawk on my fist. I got like 20 minutes, maybe 30 to at least put up one, So there's a reason. Sometimes I've caught flack for it. They see a photo where I have 3 bird dogs in the background, and they're like, did you really need 3 dogs to catch a quail? Yes, I did. And if you can do it better, come show me and I will eat my lunch. Because those 3 dogs hunt independently, and I might have a dog 600 yards to my left on point while I got a dog 300 yards in front of me on point. And I'm going to go to the close dog first. And sometimes I get lucky and I catch that quail and I'm running to the next dog on point. And that's the only way. Like, if you want to catch 3 quail in 2 hours in an area where they're hard to find, that's how you got to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and those dogs are pointing different coveys. And what another part of quail hawking that people don't understand is when there's 30 rabbits in 10 acres, there's 30 rabbits dispersed amongst those 10 acres. But when there's 30 quail in 10 acres, that's one covey that move in unison around that 10 acres. So you got to find that group and split it up if you want to have multiple flights. But that first flight, they're all together. And so people are like, well, yeah, there's a lot of quail, but that whole group of quail for that, say, 10 acres or 100 acres, those groups of quail move together. So, like, yes, there might be 500 quail in 100 acres, but they're moving in groups of 15 or 20, 25. And that makes it just as hard to find a covey of quail as it is a single rabbit slip over an area. And so that's why you run bird dogs at point. And so people don't get it unless they've done it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, or at least seen it, and just can appreciate, just the subtle differences and the gravity of what it takes to make all that stuff work, for sure. But, well, and like you said, I mean, I know that we could, talk about some certain things, literally probably the rest of the day, but, before, I mean, we call this good and start to wrap things up a little bit, I definitely want to kind of end on the same note that we usually end on and get at least 1 or 2 of your favorite hunting stories, experiences about, particular, either birds or dogs that you've had, and then end with, the best piece of advice that you could think of to pass on, to people, and then, call it good, man.
Favorite hunting story. Any falconer that's been a falconer for more than a few seasons has a toolbox full. Favorite hunting story, I guess if you had to ask me right now about a personal bird of mine, McDermott taught me a lot about quail hawking and bird dogs, and he really lit that fire, and so did his books. He did in person. He's a great friend, but he had came down to New Mexico that first season I had Hash Brown, and my Vizsla went on point. Young setter came in, slammed it back, and quail started to run. Scaled quail love to run, and that can be hard for a young dog, but a seasoned dog makes short work of it. And at this point, Trigger was like starting to teeter into what would call a seasoned dog, and he was getting pretty good at scaled quail. And quail started to run, and I always had a verbal release on my Vizsla. I don't really have it on my setters, but goshawk takes off in like a searching flight, and he sees the running quail before we do. He's the reason we know they're running, and he got really good at this. And he would pitch up, and he would go maybe 30, 50 feet and kind of like flare his wings like a kestrel and kind of hover there. And those quail stop running. They pinned. And so I'm screaming free, which is my release word for Trigger. And he runs in and he flushes the covey. So a covey just erupts under a hovering goshawk. And I got Mike McDermott right next to me. And Hash Brown folds his wings and just smacks one right out of the air, like right over a verbal release after a pointed find. And the person who had got me into quail hawking, the person who had taught me quail hawking and got me into Vizslas is right there with me for the first time, for me doing it on my own, for him to bear witness. And that to me is always a favorite story. And so there was a person who's now a falconer there. Her name's Hannah Hayes. And when she came out to that trip, she just wanted to see falconry. She had no interest in getting into it. And when she left, she was like, no, I will. That same thing that I experienced in Texas with the Harris Hawks and the dogs, that's setting the hook for me. That set the hook for her because she was just a gun hunter at the time with one Vizsla, and now she's like a dog trainer and a falconer now. So like that to me is a favorite story, for not just because Mike was there, but because it created another falconer who flies over dogs now.
If there's any other, memorable, like the most memorable dog that you either have now or have had in the past, as far as, your impact on not just your falconry, but could be any way, you feel free to mention that also. But I know you've had a lot of dogs too, so I didn't know. Yeah.
Favorite dog, I mean, depends on the day.
In the circumstance, I'm sure, but
I guess another favorite story was my best friend, Yubi. He was flying a red tail on jackrabbits up in Nevada and hadn't caught any yet. And I took my dachshund Vader up there. And Vader was running one just open on a jackrabbit, trying his best to keep up. And it was his first red tail. Catches that jackrabbit over a dog, and it was that's my childhood best friend, his first bird, his first jackrabbit. And I didn't live near him at the time, but I happened to be there for that. That's another favorite story. Favorite dog, I can't really pick a favorite dog. Zoid will always be among the favorites for like opening that door. Trigger will always be among the favorites for he was the first pointing dog of my own that I was catching consistently over. And although I've transitioned into setters, I still have Trigger, and he will still be my right-hand man. And then Kira is the dog that sold me full send on setters for my own. She was the first setter I raised. I had two before her, but she was the first one I raised, and she was the one that, like, she's just been a once-in-a-lifetime dog. Her first season, I caught 5 of the 6 North American quail species over her. And she was my first big runner, and she's what transitioned me being stoked about catching 1 quail a day to segmenting my falconry into now we're catching daily limits, which is 3, because me and Trigger would be trading off from the first quail we caught, and Kira would already be on the next covey pointed, and she'd hold those birds till we got there. And so those 3 dogs, those 3 definitely. I guess you could add a 4th one. I've had a few Yag Terriers over the years, but the one that really full sold me on the breed, I was kind of ambivalent to them. Like, I had them, I used them, I loved them, but Mouse is the dog I have now, and she's getting up there in age, but she was the first Yag Terrier I had that was so full of personality and so unique, and just the only thing stopping her from speaking English is vocal cords. Like she's like my right hand terrier. Like she just knows what's going on at all times. All right, we're doing falconry today, or I'm flushing for bird dogs and retrieving, or I'm running raccoons out of attics, or I'm play fighting with my 5-year-old son. Mouse is that dog. So I guess, yeah, those 4 dogs, Zoid, first dachshund, Trigger, first Vizsla, Kira, first setter, I personally raised, and then Mouse is she wasn't my first Yag, she was like the 3rd or 4th, but the most important, if I had to pick 4 dogs, that's about all I can narrow it down to for favorite dogs. As far as, I mean, I could pick a few favorite dogs I've seen over the years that weren't mine. UB Gyverson's dog Nebula is a full sibling to my Gomorrah dog, who I love a lot and is an incredible dog. But that Nebula dog is a very special dog, nice setter, and just like Kira is to me is to him. But he's let me borrow her, and I've hawked over her, and I've caught quail over her. And then a dog that turned me, or definitely turned a light bulb on about spaniels, Chris Price. I don't know if you've talked with him on here. He's got a Springer Spaniel that he flies peregrines over on, like doves and snipe. That was a dog when I saw him, I'm like, why don't more falconers have spaniels? Spaniels fit in a lot of holes. They're a round peg for a round hole for a lot of people. And the cool thing about spaniels in falconry is a lot of people get into falconry and then they change what they're doing after a few years. And like I said, dogs 15-year commitment. So if they're not willing to ever get rid of a dog or put it in a better place, a spaniel's a great dog that could be a quail hawking dog, a duck hawking dog, a rabbit dog. Spaniels do enough of everything very well, and they're very obsessed with their human, and they're very biddable. I would like to see more spaniel popularity. I've only got one spaniel, and that's all I need, but she does a lot of jobs that are specific to her, and she does them really well. But I think falconers getting into falconry that don't have dogs, a spaniel's a good, safe bet to always have a job for a falconer. Cockers, springers. So yeah, Chris Price's dog was the one that kind of showed me that, and I've got a cocker named River. Hannah, who I was talking about earlier, trains spaniels for a living now. Nick Yashko's got a sibling to my River dog, great little dog, and I hear a lot of people that meet her end up getting a spaniel. So like, it's cool. It's cool watching those like trajectories of people's dogs and what they do to other people too. So yeah. It's really all I got on that.
Well, cool, man. Well, once again, we got a couple other things that we got to do before we head out and start our, drives that I'm sure we're both dreading. You probably even more so than me, obviously. But I like I said before, I like to end, or have been liking to end these podcasts with getting, a piece of advice or a sentiment, or, just something they'd like to pass along to either current or future generations of falconers. And, after that, we can call this good, man.
Any advice? My best advice I could give any new falconer or any falconer in general is, ignore anyone giving you advice that you haven't seen the falconry you want to emulate from. Like, there's a lot of falconers giving a lot of advice on a lot of things that they shouldn't be, and if it's not someone doing the kind of falconry you want, or doing the kind of falconry you perceive as good, just tune it out. Don't put too much stock in their opinion. I mean, car hawking is a huge debate, and while I'll always argue that and agree that car hawking isn't like the most challenging thing in the world, it's accessible, and so there's people out there doing it, and hit them up. Don't hit up the person reminding you that it's a gray area in some states. Like, just ignore them. They're not paid to be a cop. the car hawking's fun. And cool thing I've always loved about car hawking is I can load the car up with people, and like they're going to keep up, because we all know how well non-falconers keep up in the field. And they get to all see it. They see the start to finish, and like that might set the hook for them, and let it. And so, I mean, they're hawking starlings. It's an invasive species. Just cut them a little bit more slack. So just be very careful of who you take stock in. And like Matt wrote in one of his books that the internet is full of volume but lacks substance, or something along those lines. And that is a perfect description of internet falconry. It's very loud, but it doesn't have a lot of substance to it sometimes. So yeah, and then like your falconry is not my falconry, and it might never be my falconry, and my falconry may never be your falconry. So just, I mean, at the end of the day, we're here because we enjoy it. And if you're not enjoying it, it's not the right thing. And so do what you enjoy. Don't get me wrong, always challenge yourself, always set goals. But if you're just doing it because it's hard and it's impressing other people, you've missed the entire essence of falconry. Because you can enjoy it because it's hard, but do it because you enjoy it. Don't do it because it gives you some illusion of status in the falconry tiered systems. So that's really the only advice I can give that's wholesale universal. But I guess that's all we got.
Yeah, man. No, like I said, I mean, hopefully people will get something out of our, catching up after like what seems like forever, and some of our banter and
7 years.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, I haven't seen you since I picked up Azula, and I flew Azula every year, and I finally gave her to Nicole Peretta, who now is a very good off-stringer, but Harris Hawks are what work for her. And I was like, hey, I got a Harris Hawk that is the most turnkey, couldn't lose it, doesn't really care for dogs too much, could live in a giant hood silently and live a very happy life as long as she's hawked every day. And now Nicole's got her.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I miss about that bird. I don't, like I said, anymore. I prefer to just go ahead and start from scratch, like you said, rather than, like do anything that is even remotely secondhand anymore. But I mean, there was a lot of things that bird provided a lot of really amazing firsts for me too.
Yeah.
I miss some things about that bird for sure.
That bird humbled me in a lot of ways, and then became one of the most lethal Harris Hawks I've ever seen on jackrabbits. And then
she was gamey.
Yeah, she was incredible on squirrels over dogs, and I flew her over Yag Terriers, Deckers, and Dachshunds on squirrels. And then I took her out to New Mexico, like turned her whole world upside down, and hawked the heck out of her on jackrabbits. And she got pickier about dogs in those situations than she was about squirrels. And that's when I was like, she got to the point where she would only fly over just my Wiesla, and that was, and she was providing such spectacular flights that I didn't want to tune her weight down to where she accepted dogs, because it changed her flying style.
Well, you know why it probably was? It's because she flew over my Wieslas.
I didn't even think of that. I never connected that dot.
Shay was the only dog she would ever fly over.
Like,
before I transferred her to you.
Yeah.
Like my Wiesla Shay. I mean, she
never connected that dot.
I
got her to hunt over a lot of dogs, but once she went out to the desert, it was trigger.
She never had an issue with my Wieslas. Never. And then well, I don't even think I had Blitz at that time yet. But I mean, like Shay, she grew up with Shay. I hunted her with Shay.
Yeah.
But it was the other dog issues.
That's so funny.
Which we won't mention, but
yeah.
But that was the only reason why I ever transferred her to you in the first place. But like, it makes perfect sense now that you're saying that. Like, I'm glad I could connect that dot for you. Possibly,
yeah. Just like a little moment of relief right there. I was like, no, I never understood it, because she like my cocker, my setters, my My Yags, the same Yags that she hunted over in Missouri, she wouldn't hunt over them in the desert, and it's just different, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, like I said, man, I mean, she was always familiar, like ever since I got her. I mean, I had her familiar with Shay, and she would hunt with Shay and stuff. It was just the other rando dogs that would pop in and out of.
There's a lot of those in New Mexico, and that was my fear too of do I turn the screws on her weight to get her to tolerate my other dogs? But then what will happen with the New Mexico like feral Chihuahuas and pit bulls? Like I'm good.
No, it's a bad combination with that bird.
And then I eventually, I went the opposite with it. I started flying her higher and higher, and I taught her to take pigeons, like sealed pigeons, out of a soar because we get really good thermals in some parts of New Mexico. And then I transitioned into just soaring her on jacks, no T-pole, no glove, and I had a lot of fun, and I had a really close call with her. She came out of a soar and a cottontail. She mostly catching jacks, but a cottontail had stopped, and she slammed right into the ground, and she was unconscious in my hands. And then the only way to prevent cottontails from doing that is adding more dogs. And I that was the crossroads I had reached with her. I was like, well, I can't add more dogs because I'm going to have to cut her weight. She's going to stop soaring.
Yeah.
And that's when I asked Nicole if she would take her.
Her aggression issues with dogs never came out until after I caught those first 2 jackrabbits with her. And then she just started getting more and more confident.
Yeah.
And like I said, I ended up, before I transferred her to you, I mean, I had caught 2 jacks and like 11 or 12 cottontails, but then like she also would start catching everything. It was like possum, 2 feral cats, 2 whatever, and then the other issues happened, and she was like too confident.
Yeah, I mean, I even caught a couple pheasant with her. I caught ducks with her. Mm-hmm. She caught some widgeons. She caught some mallards, and I was like, well, I can duck hawk her. And then where I have ducks in New Mexico, there's dogs, and I was like, nope.
Yeah.
And that's a liability, and I don't want some abuela coming out and beating her with a broom because it's on Fluffy. So that's why she's with Nicole now, and who flies her at a weight where the bird should be flown at, because she doesn't need to tolerate. Nicole doesn't fly over dogs, to my knowledge. Yeah. So she's in the right place now. But it was kind of funny how that connected a dot. I never knew why she had hunted over Kira and Trigger just as much, and she was like, no, I don't want to fly over Kira. I'll just fly over Trigger. And I didn't get it, but now I'm like, wow, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, no, it was totally probably her initial comfort zone, man. Like, literally from the day that I got her from my sponsor who bred her, I mean, like she was around Shay. I mean, she was used to it. But, she just never really took to other dogs, and especially the smaller ones.
And it's I always find that funny because that's a common story in a lot of Harris hawks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But goshawks have that reputation. They don't accept new dogs, and every goshawk I've had is very accepting of most new dogs, whereas most Harris hawks I've had, once they pick their team, that's their team, and then they're very they'll be very cool with cars and new people, but dogs, they're like, nope, I've picked my team. This is my team for the rest of my life. And it's funny that goshawks got that reputation when it's Harris's deserve that reputation, I guess.
Yeah, I think, I think goshawks have that reputation only in a different way. I mean, I think, at least in my experience, and I've seen a lot of goshawks fly, I've never flown one myself, but I've seen a lot of them fly. I mean, it's always kind of the fear, I'm going to fly away. I won't tolerate you. I'm not going to hunt worth a crap, whatever, but I'm not going to attack you. Harris hawks, I've always seen, I'm going to attack you.
And there is goshawks that will, and I've seen those, and I've flown 2 of those, but most Harris, if I had to pick a bird in falconry that I've seen take to the dogs to the ground more than any other bird, it would be Harris hawks. I've seen
for sure
so many Harris hawks muzzle a dog and grapple it to the ground, and whereas a lot of my goshawks that I've flown, when Hash Brown, who loved dogs, when he was done eating his trade-off piece every single hunt, his whole life, never missed one. He would bop trigger on the rear end with a foot. Wouldn't grab him, just to remind him, like, this is my
mine.
10-foot circle.
Mm-hmm.
That bird never bound to a dog once in 3 seasons, whereas like I've seen Azula take trigger to the ground.
Yeah, I was gonna say bound to like 3 different dogs in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's funny, man. But once again, before we get too off topic and start talking about a whole other thing again for another like 2 hours, we'll go ahead and call this good, man. I mean, this has been fun. I'm glad that we can make this work, and glad the circumstances finally provided the right catalyst for kind of bringing this together.
And I'm glad it crossed paths when we did, because we got to talk about multiple topics at once too, and it wasn't over the phone. It was really good catching up, and glad you got to run your dogs this weekend in the trial, and hope you had fun and put some names to some faces too. There's a lot of people that were here. No, it was cool getting to meet some of these guys for the first time that I'd seen on social, but like hadn't actually met in person yet. And it was cool for the dachshunds to be introduced to some different stuff that they had never been introduced to before. Hopefully they didn't embarrass themselves too much. But yeah, man. Well, now you know what to expect too. You know what the events look like, and can't really hold it against a dog that's never seen a raccoon in its life to not really care.
No, for sure. And that's why I was just kind of like, well, I go into all these things with literally zero expectation, and it's not the real 100% reason why I was here. I mean, the main reason, obviously, the main motivation was making this happen, like what we're doing right now, of course. But, everything else was a bonus, but,
appreciate you making it happen. You definitely jumped through hoops that most humans wouldn't to make this happen. And I appreciate you having me on here. So it was good to catch up, and good to delve into some deeper topics within falconry with you.
Yeah. No, awesome, man. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again some other time. That's not, another like 6 or 7 or 8 years from now. But
no, I don't think it'll be that long.
Probably not. But all right, man. Well, we will get off of here, take care of a couple things, and then get ready to head out.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Cool, man.